The moment I saw Daniel standing on my porch, holding a corsage that matched the shimmering blue of his dress, I felt a wave of relief and a rush of disbelief, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. It was a moment 18 years in the making. A moment that had survived playground whispers, teenage mockery, and the brutal, unforgiving social politics of high school. I stood there, star quarterback of our high school football team, captain of the student council, the guy who had everything. And the only thought running through my mind was this: was I insane for following through on a promise made by a naive, gap-toothed fourth grader, knowing what it could cost me? Was I truly a hero? Or was I just a fool, setting myself up for a lifetime of regret and the potential ruin of my reputation? I want you to tell me, right now, before I even start this story, would you have risked everything to keep a promise that everyone else, even your closest friends and the girl you were secretly in love with, said was career suicide? Hold that thought, because to understand why that moment on the porch was so monumental, why it was the defining moment of my entire young life, I have to take you all the way back to Mrs. Peterson's fourth grade classroom, a place where life was simple and promises were everything. That all started on a rainy Tuesday afternoon during indoor recess. I was the new kid in town, trying desperately to fit in with the other boys who were all obsessed with Pokemon cards and the upcoming school baseball tryouts. My name is Alex, and even back then, I was bigger and faster than everyone else, a trait that usually makes it easy to make friends. But being the new kid meant I was still on the outside looking in. I was sitting alone at a small table, miserably trying to draw a comic book hero, when a boy with the most infectious, genuine smile I had ever seen walked up to me. This was Daniel. Daniel had Down syndrome, and in the sometimes cruel and often confusing world of a 9-year-old, that made him an anomaly. The other kids generally ignored him, or worse, whispered about him behind cupped hands. But Daniel didn't seem to notice or care. He just saw a kid sitting alone, and he saw a potential friend. He didn't ask me about he pointed at my drawing and said, in a slightly slurred but enthusiastic voice, "Wow, is that a superhero? He's strong." That simple compliment, devoid of any pretense or calculation, melted away my new kid anxiety instantly. I spent the rest of that recess and many that followed talking to Daniel. He loved superheroes, especially Superman. He loved listening to stories, and he had a memory like a steel trap. He wasn't like the other kids who were always trying to warn up each other. Daniel just was. He was pure, uncomplicated joy. One day, we were talking about my older sister's upcoming 8th grade dance. She was making a huge deal out of it, picking out a dress, arguing with our mom, and Daniel, his eyes wide with wonder, said, "I wish I could go to a big dance like that with a pretty girl." It was a simple, innocent wish, and in the earnest, simple world of I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Daniel, when we're in high school and it's time for the biggest dance, the prom, I promise you, I will take you. We'll go together." Daniel's face lit up like a Christmas tree, and he sealed the deal with a high five that was more like a clumsy I didn't think much of it then. It was just a childhood promise, a fleeting thought, but to Daniel, it was a covenant. Over the years, our friendship continued, though it was tested by the increasing pressure of social groups. Elementary school faded into the awkwardness of middle school, and the hierarchy became starker. I started playing organized sports and quickly became one of the guys. Daniel, meanwhile, remained in the fringes, mostly within the special education program. We still had lunch together occasionally, and I always made a point to greet him in the hallway. But the invisible line drawn by social expectation began to get thicker. My friends would sometimes smirk when I talked to him, or make a quick, hurtful joke once we were out of earshot. "Still hanging out with your little buddy, Alex?" My then best friend, Mark, would sneer. I'd laugh it off and change the subject, but every time I did, a small, cold knot of guilt would form in my stomach. I never stopped seeing Daniel, but I definitely started seeing him less in public spaces where my social standing was on the line. The promise, though, was never forgotten, at least, not by him. Every year, around the time of the spring formal, Daniel would ask me, "Alex, are you going to the big dance? We have to practice our moves for prom." And every time, I'd give him a reassuring nod and a quick "of course, buddy. Don't worry about it." It was easy to say it when prom was years away. It was a distant, theoretical commitment. Then came high school. The absolute, undeniable peak of the social pyramid was being on the varsity football team. And as the starting quarterback, I was right at the top. I had the girlfriend Sarah, beautiful, popular, head cheerleader. The college scouts were circling, and I had a future that felt limitless, paved with scholarships and glory. Prom was no longer a theoretical event. It was the social coronation of my senior year. Sarah and I were the de facto king and queen. It was expected that I would ask her in some grand, public way, and we would arrive together in a borrowed luxury car, setting the tone for the night. The pressure was immense, and the closer it got, the more the old fourth grade promise began to feel like a lead weight tied to my ankle. Daniel brought it up in the cafeteria 3 months before prom. I was sitting with the team and Sarah, going over plays and making plans for the after party. And Daniel, completely oblivious to the social earthquake he was about to cause, walked right up to our table. "Alex, it's almost time," he announced, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent area. "For what, Daniel?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, though my face was burning. "For prom, you promised. We're going together." The table erupted in a chorus of snorts and stifled laughter. Sarah's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up to her hairline. "Wait, Alex, what is he talking about?" she asked, her voice laced with confusion, and worse, a slight edge of condescension. I quickly tried to brush it off, muttering something about a joke from when we were kids, pulling Daniel aside, and promising to talk to him later. But the damage was done. The rumors spread through the school like wildfire. "Alex, the star quarterback, is taking the special ed kid to prom." The initial reaction from my peers was a mixture of cruel mockery and pity. "Are you serious, Alex? You're going to be seen with him? Your college image? Dude, think about your image." Mark, now the offensive tackle, and still my supposed best friend, was the most vocal. "Look, I get it, you're a nice guy, but this is prom. This is our night. You can't show up with him. It's ridiculous. It'll be a disaster." Sarah, the girl who I was genuinely falling for, sat me down for a serious talk a week later. She was trying to be kind, but her practical social climbing side won out. "Alex, honey, it's sweet that you remember him, but you can't. It's not fair to either of us. We're supposed to go together. Everyone expects it. Think about the photos. Think about the dance floor. People will stare, and not in a good way. It will ruin the night for us." She even suggested I give him some money and a nice note. Maybe take him out for ice cream the week before. A lovely gesture, Alex, but it fulfills the promise without the public spectacle. Her words, though delivered with a soft touch, felt like a betrayal. Everyone, from my friends to my girlfriend to even my own father, who worried about my college applications, subtly or explicitly pressured me to back out. They all saw it as a childish commitment I had grown out of, a liability to my future, a potential punchline to a cruel joke. But every time I looked at Daniel, with his trusting, unwavering belief that I would come through, the memory of that 9-year-old hi-fi, and his simple, pure joy, flooded my conscience. I saw the man I was supposed to be, and the man society was trying to mold me into. The conflict was tearing me apart. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, wondering which promise was more important, the one I made to myself about success, popularity, and the perfect high school life, or the one I made to a boy who just wanted one perfect, magical night like the heroes in his comics. I started avoiding Daniel, making excuses, hoping the problem would just go away, but that only made the guilt worse. Daniel started looking sad in the hallways, and he stopped asking me about the dance. He just gave me a quiet, hopeful wave that twisted the knife in my gut. I knew, deep down, that the moment I walked into prom with Sarah, dressed perfectly and playing the part of the king, I would be selling a piece of my soul. I would be prioritizing an image over a person, convenience over character, and the superficial over the sacred. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice that felt like choosing between my future and my integrity. Before I tell you what happened next, what I did, and the absolute chaos and drama it caused, I want you to pause and comment below right now. Tell me, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have listened to the practical advice of your friends and family, saved your reputation, and maybe even your relationship? Or would you have risked it all to keep a promise that everyone called stupid and unnecessary? The night before prom, I broke up with Sarah. It was awful. She cried. She screamed. She called me selfish and ridiculous. "You're throwing away everything for this," she shouted, and I knew she was right, at least from her perspective. The next morning, I went to the florist. Not for a wrist corsage for the head cheerleader, but for a Prom corsage in a rich, shimmering blue, Daniel's favorite color, the color of Superman's suit. I drove to Daniel's house, not in the borrowed Mercedes I had lined up, but in my own beat-up, slightly rusted truck. I knocked on his door, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. I felt physically sick, terrified of the social repercussions that were surely coming. But oddly, a deep, profound sense of peace had settled over me. When Daniel's mom, a kind, perpetually tired woman, opened the door, her eyes were wide with surprise. "Alex, what are you doing here?" she asked, clearly expecting me to be somewhere else. "Perhaps with Sarah." "I'm here for Daniel, Mrs. Thompson. I'm taking him to prom tonight," I said, holding up the small velvet box with the corsage. Her eyes welled up instantly. "Oh, Alex ... You remembered." He stopped talking about it. "I thought you had." She couldn't finish the sentence, but the silent gratitude in her eyes was more powerful than any speech. She called Daniel, and that's when the whole 18-year journey culminated in that front porch moment. Daniel came out in a slightly too big borrowed tuxedo, his hair neatly combed, and that huge, wonderful, gap-toothed fourth-grade smile was back, a million times bigger. "Alex, you came. You didn't forget, my best friend?" he exclaimed, rushing towards me and wrapping me in a hug that was surprisingly strong. I pinned the blue corsage to his lapel, and he inspected it with the reverence of a king receiving his crown. I put a blue boutonniere on my own lapel, For him, I wasn't the star quarterback. I was just Alex, his friend, who kept his word. We arrived at the prom about 30 minutes late. When we walked through the doors of the gymnasium, which had been transformed into a sparkling enchanted forest, the music seemed to die slightly, and a silence fell over the crowd of over 300 students. It wasn't the welcoming, admiring silence I usually got. It was an uncomfortable, staring, judgmental silence. I felt every single pair of eyes on us. I heard a few snickers near the entrance. I saw Mark shake his head from across the room. And I saw Sarah, sitting at a table with a group of friends, her eyes narrowed in a look of cold, furious disbelief. For a moment, my confidence faltered. I felt the heat rising in my neck. I've ruined everything. They're laughing at me. Daniel, though, was completely oblivious. He was too busy looking around at the decorations, mesmerized by the lights and the music. Wow, Alex, it's so beautiful, he whispered excitedly. And then, something amazing happened. A girl from the drama club, not one of the popular kids, but someone I knew by name, smiled warmly and walked over. Hey, Daniel, you look great. What a cool suit, she said genuinely. Daniel beamed, and they talked about the DJ's playlist. Then, a few of the quieter kids, the ones who usually faded into the background, came up and started congratulating Daniel and even giving me a thumbs up. The tide was turning slowly, one kind interaction at a time. The real turning point came during the slow dance. Daniel, in all his charming innocence, simply asked me, Alex, where are the pretty girls? I have to dance with a pretty girl. I scanned the room, and I saw Maria, a lovely, kind girl from my English class who was known for her volunteering and her gentle nature. She was sitting alone. I took Daniel's hand and led him over to her. Maria, this is Daniel. Daniel, this is Maria. She's one of the prettiest girls I know. Would you like to dance? I asked her, holding my breath. Maria looked from me to Daniel, and an incredible soft smile spread across her face. She stood up and said, I would love to, Daniel. And they danced. It was a clumsy, adorable, joyful dance. They giggled. Daniel stepped on her foot, and she didn't care. They were having the time of their lives. And then, one by one, other people started joining them on the dance floor. Not the popular clique, but the genuine people, the ones who valued kindness over status. The atmosphere shifted from awkward judgment to genuine warmth and acceptance. Mark and the others watched, looking bewildered and uncomfortable. Sarah, unable to stand the sight, abruptly left the dance floor. I spent the rest of the night talking to Daniel, introducing him to people, and watching him live out his fourth-grade dream. He was the most popular person in the room. He was the star. We left early, around 11 p.m., and I drove Daniel home. In the truck, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at me, and his eyes were glistening. Thank you, Alex. That was the best night ever. You're the best friend. You kept your promise. That was my reward. Not the college scouts' approval, not the photo op, but the pure, unadulterated gratitude of a true friend. The aftermath was swift. The next week, I was the subject of endless chatter. Some of it was negative. Mark and Sarah essentially exiled me from their inner circle. Mark told me I was soft and had ruined the legend of the quarterback. Sarah wouldn't speak to me for months, but the majority of the response was overwhelmingly positive. I started getting messages from kids I barely knew, thanking me. One of the college scouts, who had been on the fence, called me a few weeks later. He told me that one of the faculty members had been at the dance, and the story had gotten back to him. He said, Alex, we don't just look for talent on the field, we look for character. You showed us who you are when no one was forcing you to. I got the scholarship. More importantly, my relationship with Daniel became even stronger. We still hang out. He comes to my house to watch football games, and he still loves Superman. And Maria, she and I started talking after prom. She saw who I was when I made a difficult choice, and we ended up dating all through college. We're getting married next year. The lesson I took from that night wasn't about being a hero. It was about the true cost of integrity. It's easy to be a good person when it's convenient. It's much harder when it costs you something, when it forces you to stand alone against the crowd. I chose to keep the promise, and in doing so, I didn't lose my future. I found my real one, and I found the people who truly belonged in it. So, that's my story. It was a chaotic, dramatic, and emotionally draining experience, but it was one I wouldn't trade for anything. It taught me that the biggest difference you can make is often the one you make in the life of a single person, not the one you try to make for an entire crowd. I stood by Daniel, and in the end, that choice stood by me. Like this video right now if you were on my side. If you think keeping a promise, no matter how small or old, is the most important thing a person can do, be sure to subscribe for more deeply personal and shocking stories from the Facts Life niche. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. Do you think I made the right choice in the end? I'll see you all in the next story.